This fall, bring the beauty of the Rabbit Room into your own community with House Moot. It's a self-hosted gathering where your living room, church, or backyard becomes a place for shared stories, songs, and sacred conversations. With recorded sessions, recipes, activities, discussion questions, and a gathering guide, we'll set the table for you. All you have to do is bring the guests. Get everything you need to host your own House Moot at rabbitroom.com/housemoot.
I know the power of stories, and I know that my calling, my gladness, is a way in that joint mission of caring for that next generation. That is my little part that I'm designed to play. And so grateful for the people along the spectrum who are there feeding and clothing and want to support them as well, right?
Mitali Perkins has written many books for young readers, including You Bring the Distant Near, nominated for a National Book Award, and Rickshaw Girl, adapted into a film. All of her books explore crossing different kinds of borders. Her goal is to make readers laugh or cry, preferably both, as long as their hearts are widening. Her new book is for grown-ups. It's called Just Making, a guide for compassionate creatives. In it, Mitali begins answering the questions: why should we make art while injustice and suffering wreak havoc? How can we justify making beautiful things? And how do we keep doing the work? In this episode, Mitali Perkins and I talk about justice and creativity, the ups and downs of her career, 5 destructive interior forces that keep us from doing creative work, and practices that counteract those forces. Mitali Perkins, it's so good to have you back on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's always a delight to talk to you.
Well, I am delighted to talk about your newish book, Just Making, a guide for compassionate creatives.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate the chance to talk about it.
So you start pretty early. I think it might be the first page. You ask the question, why should I make art when suffering, injustice, and oppression are wreaking havoc on the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so you wrote a book about that, but rather than having you read the book, what's the short-ish answer to that question? Why should we make art when there's suffering and injustice and things like that?
I think everybody who cares about a suffering world asks that question at some point. Oscar Wilde's famous quote of, I spent all morning putting in a comma, and then on mature reflection, I put it back again. You know, that idea of what we do. When I spend all morning thinking about a noun, which noun do I put into this? Because I write fiction mostly. Yeah. And then in the meantime, there's all of this stuff going on just not far from my home that are human beings who are really in dire need. And so how do I justify that time of my investment in a noun when there are people suffering? And so that's what I'm looking at in the book. I explore that. And it really comes down to the idea that the making of art is it's not superfluous, it's actually essential to human flourishing. I try to make that case in the first part of the book where I talk about how our creativity, and this is not just creativity that is for the marketplace, but creativity in general, anything that we do to make brings flourishing, and not just justice, a step beyond the idea of flourishing, the idea of shalom, the idea of not just right or wrong or fair, but actually human flourishing, and that the making of art can bring that to the maker of the art, as you and I both know, and then to the receiver, the individual receiver of the thing that we create, as well as to the broader community. So I try to make a good case for that in the first part of my book.
Yeah. You and I know you started in the field. I think maybe you even went to college. When you started college, you thought you were headed into international development.
Yes, right, Jonathan. That's right. What happened? How did
you get rerouted?
Myself? Well, this is a question that my immigrant parents really asked because, as I said in my previous podcast with you, we came here when I was 7 years old. My parents were originally refugees from what is now Bangladesh, immigrated to the United States when the visas opened up, but really had lost everything in the war of partition. And so when they came here, they determined to live that American dream. And did they ever? And they sent us all to great colleges, the 3 of us girls, and they had really high hopes for us. As I joked before, I think that there were three career options. There was doctor, engineer, or doctor. Those were the three options we had in our. And so the interesting thing is I did choose a career in international development. I studied political science and I went on to get a master's in public policy and international development. So how did I even make the shift from a more lucrative kind of work that my parents wanted? That was maybe would give them that sense of pride and accomplishment for all that they suffered and sacrificed, over to this idea of trying to make the world a better place to alleviate suffering. And I can only attribute that decision, that first decision to study international development, to the books that I read as a kid. Because we didn't grow up here. You probably did in the South there, heard about tithing or being philanthropic or charity. I don't know if you did or not.
Sure, yeah.
But
I know all about tithing.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was, but that was not, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. So we didn't hear that. And my parents, they're refugees. They're trying to put rice on our table. So why are they going to talk about putting rice on someone else's table? That was not part of our vocabulary as a family. They were wonderful people, but not that idea of charity or philanthropy or justice, really. I think that is a mark of being privileged in some ways, is to be able to even ask that question, fight for justice. In any case, I can only say I read books. I was a feral, wild reader as a child, found my way to the public library when I was 7 and read, just without any adult guidance, just read hundreds and hundreds of heroes' journeys. And the subtext of a lot of those was that we are to care for the suffering, that we are to fight for justice, that we are to have hearts that are compassionate. And I can give your listeners many examples of the books that I read, but I wrote about it in my first nonfiction book, Steeped in Stories, some of these books that widened my heart. And then by the time I got to college, I thought, there's not going to be one hungry child left on the planet before I die. When you're so idealistic, I'm going to make sure that by the time my last breath comes, there'll be no hungry children on earth. That's why I chose that field. And then how I became a children's book writer is yet another leap. My parents were like, "Oh, what is happening? I don't know what is happening."
But the question is, how did you make that second leap?
Yeah. Well, it was really through some of the things I share about in this book, that idea of a vocation, of a deep sense of calling, as that beautiful quote by Frederick Buechner, where the world's great need meets your great joy. I don't know, misquoting it, but
I think gladness, I think, is the word.
Gladness. Yeah, that's right. Gladness. So stories always made me glad. The reading of them and the making of them. I have poems and stories from when I was 9 years old that I was making up. I know we talked about this last time. You do too, right? So it was just one of the ways I spent my time. When I was bored, I would create a story. I would make a story up, and so I struggled against that. I didn't want it to be my vocation. I wanted it to be a hobby. And so I wrote my first book, and it was fiction for kids, and it won a contest. And then I write in Just Making about how it was the second book that really formed my vocation, because the second book was rejected after I revised it thoroughly. They asked for revisions, and then I revised, and then it was rejected by 22 different publishers. And it took 11 years or 12 years from my first book to my second book. And it was during that time when I would periodically retreat and say, either I'm insane to God. I would say, God, this is the definition of insanity. I keep doing this. It's like, give me a wall and I'll bash my head against it yet again. and God, in the sweetness of the conversations that I would have with God, I would hear, no, my darling, this is what you are designed to do. Yeah. This is what I want you to do with your one, Mary Oliver-esque, one wild and precious life. And I kept thinking, what? Because I didn't have support from home or anything like that.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen Karen Swallow Prior's new book about calling, but she talks about the idea that passion started out life meaning suffering. And so your passion for this work, it means you're willing to suffer for it. And it sounds like you did suffer for it. Sounds like you got 21 rejections before you got your 22nd rejection.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we do have to face that. The fact, as I point out, that when we are making something, or whether it's a vocation or a career or both, when we are in the business of making something, chaos will always push back.
Mhm.
Because what we're doing is we're ordering, we're being in the image of God. We're bringing beauty, truth, and goodness into the world, and that is going to face obstruction. It's going to face opposition. And there is a suffering to that. And anytime we make anything, there's an overcoming of suffering, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I like the idea that, you went from, I'm going to make sure there aren't any starving children, to thinking about what's the world like for children after they're not, well, if I'm not starving anymore, then what? Then what kind of world am I living in? And of course, is exceedingly important to the people who are taking care of starving children. But then there's also the question of, we still have to be inviting people into a world where they're flourishing and not just not starving.
That's right. I think there's that quote. It's misattributed to Damon of Athens, but I think it was from some Scottish minister who said, "You keep the laws of a nation, but give me the songs of a nation."
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to change the fabric of a nation, and so it's almost like we're all in that journey of trying to help the next generation to to leave behind a place that is better than what we've encountered. And it sure seems like we're not doing a good job at that, but we're all in a team to try to help the next generation have that flourishing. And there are different places to enter that. And we have to enter into that shared mission, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
find the way that we're uniquely designed to do that. And for me, it was the belief, because I saw in my own heart how the songs and stories formed me in a
Mm-hmm.
rich, before I even heard the name of Jesus, before I ever encountered anything to do with Christianity or even Judeo-Christianity. I was deeply formed by the stories I read when it comes to my desire to be virtuous, or to lean into hope, or to even understand what true north is when it comes to justice, or any of those things. I was deeply formed by those storytellers. And so
Yeah.
when the time came for me to encounter Jesus, I was like, "Oh yeah, I know you. I know you.
This
I know
makes
all
sense.
about you." Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because he was the true north, right? And I had already been shaped and formed for that. So I know the power of stories, and I know that my calling, my gladness, is a way in that joint mission of sharing, caring for that next generation.
Uh-huh.
That is my little part that I'm designed to play. And so grateful for the people along the spectrum who are there feeding and clothing, and want to support
Yeah.
them as well, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Um, can we talk about quilting for a minute? You start the book, the first chapter or so is a lot of quilting, a lot of textile arts. Um,
Yes,
that
yes.
was not where I expected this book to start. So let's talk about why quilting. Why was that worth starting this book with?
One of my practices in the idea of just keeping on making through a long life of this vocation is that idea of finding mentors in the margins, the
Mm-hmm.
places where there's no support to make, where there's no even money or anything to do with. They're so far from the market, there's not even any hope they would make. And yet they make,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful things, and they take the time to put in that extra level of artistry, right? And where I found that to take place is among quilters, whether it be in my culture of origin. Bangladeshi women, Bengali women have embroidered and quilted and sewed. And anywhere you find women, you find the needle. It's one of the most ancient tools of artistry. And even back, Jonathan, back to the garden,
Mm-hmm.
when we fell, what did our beautiful God do in response to that? He sewed, he stitched, he made clothes.
Yeah.
And then there's so much beauty to quilting. I failed homemaking class. I was I was the person. I tried with the sewing machine and the sewing. I am very fumbly with my fingers. So at some point, it was eighth grade when they still had homemaking in the middle school. And the teachers, after a couple of weeks, said, Mitali, why don't you read aloud to the rest of us while we all stitch?
Oh,
I
that's
thought,
funny.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't,
So
but my
win-win.
mother's, yeah, Miss Woodman, my mother stitches, my sister stitches, a lot of my ancestors stitched. And so I was looking at that art form because it brings forth a lot of that idea of flourishing, both for the especially for the maker of art,
Yeah.
because so much happens when women quilt. There's that rhythmic idea of just soothing of the emotions. There's the bringing in of the voice, the venue for the individual voice,
Mhm.
and yet there's also a communal aspect to it. So many times women stitch together, and
Yeah.
it's been called sort of the therapy of poverty. You know, when
Yeah.
women gather and they share their stories and they weep or they laugh or they're stitching and they're creating together and it all goes into a quilt. The stories that go into quilts. So for me, it felt like the perfect place to start this book when I'm looking at margins along the mentors and looking at an art form. So much of the art form that women make is looked down on as
Sure.
crafts rather
Yeah.
than true artistry. And it's sort of like this. I talk about the culinary arts too. Now it's called the culinary arts because there are men chef everywhere. But before it was just cooking. It was just when your grandma did it on that and brought out her cookies on that porch when you're sitting on that porch out there. It was
Yeah.
cooking, right? And it's the same thing with cooking. That creativity. It's not lucrative, but it's such a beautiful way to bring flourishing into
Yeah.
human lives.
Well, I love you pointed out that quilting is often a function of taking scraps, things that have been thrown away, and saying, no, this we're not done with this yet. We're going to make something beautiful and functional. And it like I said, I wasn't expecting for this book to start with quilting, but it made so much sense. That
Yes.
that you offered up this, uh, as you said, art brings justice to the maker, right? It's a place where the women who do this work their own lives are getting reordered through the work, and then they're also putting so much goodness into the world, beauty and functionality, and
Right. And you think about the Black women who were enslaved, who quilted and poured their hearts, their stories into those quilts. They're still to this day giving people joy and telling the stories of that time
mm-hmm.
in a way that's also a memorial to a certain period of history. That's such an important part of storytelling, remembering, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, and you think about how much they poured in, yet those quilts were not sold, they were just taken. And so
mm-hmm.
you think about that injustice of it. And um as you receive a quilt like that, your hands you think about the hands that made it and stitched it, and did they receive anything for it? Or so there's also that economic question of the does the maker benefit economically? We have to ask that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So when you ask that question, then what?
Right. So when I receive and contemplate a piece of work made by somebody who doesn't have a lot of power,
Mm-hmm.
um, that is part of the transaction, I think, of justice, is receiving it, letting it speak to me, enjoying it, thinking and picturing the hands that make it. It's one of the reasons why, my next book that comes out for kids is about tea, Darjeeling tea, which I love. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, it's plucked by some of the most powerless hands in the world, right? So
Mm-hmm.
connecting the product itself, the art itself connects us across continents and generations. There's this deep connection that happens between both the receiver of the art and if we stop to contemplate that and think about that. So there's the product itself that builds the relationship. But we also have to ask about the justice of how, always, how can I like to buy art made by women on the margins. I do. I often go hunting for that. And
Mm-hmm.
I give an example. There was a beautiful painting that I connected with in a local restaurant. It's that idea of third spaces of
Yeah.
local art. That idea of when we travel, we can actually be closer, or if we're in our local neighborhood, to people who make art. And especially for people making art on the margins, we can find them, we can buy it. So I bought this painting, and I found out it was created. It was this beautiful painting of St. Mary's College, which is right near our house, where our boys went and where I taught. And it's this chapel and the golden hills behind it, and just has such a rich sense of place. And for me as an immigrant, I'm always hungry for place. That's part of the reason why I devour fiction, is I want to be at home in so many different places, right? I have a hunger for home. And so that painting spoke to me of my adopted home, this California hills. And so it was not surprising to me that I found out she too was an immigrant. Karina Swain, there was some connection there between the way she portrayed this place I love that was also meaningful for her as a new home. And so she's not a big artist or anything. I hope maybe one day I found that I could buy her art and connect and support her in her mission. So I try to do that a lot.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a time to talk about something from Alyssa Yukiko Weichbrot, if I'm saying her name right. She's been on this podcast before, by the way. And she talked about looking with a curious, generous gaze, not the objectifying gaze geared toward consumption, surveillance, control, and condemnation. And I think maybe she was talking about both the way we receive art and creative work, and also the way we receive the world as raw material for creative work that we make. I think you may be able to help me there. But can you, there's something about that idea of looking with a curious, generous gaze and not with an inquisitive gaze that seems relevant to what you're saying about supporting, the way we receive art and support artists.
Right. I think that's true. As the receiver of art, it's a slowing down, right? It's a slowing down of the way that we see, because we're looking for beauty, truth, and goodness in what we're perusing, contemplating. It really is that loving gaze that goes back even maybe to that slowing down when those men were accusing that woman caught in adultery, and Jesus goes silent and bends down to create something in the sand, and their gaze all turns to what he's creating, and it's the pause that allows, it's that slowing down of pausing and turning the gaze, but there's also the flip side of it. So it's a slow contemplative gaze of something that someone else made that not only connects us to the maker of it, but also to the product itself. And then miracle of miracles, like as you know, in your love of Flannery O'Connor and all of your love of literature, you begin to be seen by the art itself, right? You begin to you can feel the loving gaze of God through that art. And that's the mystery of it. It's maybe not even the intention of the maker, but yet as you sit with it, with the reread, I know that we've talked about rereading with steeped in stories, and when we reread again and again a story, and we begin to be seen by the loving gaze of God through that story in such rich ways. So it does involve a slowing down. It does involve, I share an example of when I was at Grand Rapids. I was there for a month teaching at Calvin, and I was wandering in the Meyer Gardens. It was not an easy time of my life. I was confronting some healing of some shame and things from my past, and really doing that hard, deep interior work that happens at a certain stage of life. And it's not fun, but necessary if we are to mature well. I was doing that hard work, and then I was in the sculpture gardens at Meyer Gardens, and it's this wonderful combination of genres, which I always love. I love combining genres of art. Like I listen to music when I am in a museum, just that fits the period.
At a museum, you said?
Yeah, at a museum when I'm wandering, let's say in Italian art, I'll put on, Luciano Pavarotti or something like, just sort of like to connect two genres. It just adds such rich enjoyment, Then you go and have a nice Chianti in the sunshine or something like that,
Yeah.
So anyway, that day I was feeling a sense of wanting not to be seen because of this whole thing with shame. I did not want to be seen. I wanted to just to be alone and wander and not be seen. And so I was kind of hiding behind bushes and, not wanting to converse. And I come upon this statue. It's this long long arena, long a row of Lombards, maybe, or cypress trees, and at the end of
Uh-huh.
it, there's a statue, and it is huge, and it is a Rodin sculpture of Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, I don't want to see this
Mm-hmm.
piece. But I made myself walk forward, and there she is, and her pose is so painful, Jonathan. She is off balance. It
Mm-hmm.
looks like one push would just make her tumble.
Mm-hmm.
And she's trying to hide. She's trying desperately to hide, her body, her face, but she's so exposed, and she's so visible, and the light is pouring on her, and everybody from miles around can see her. And I'm walking toward the statue, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so painful. This is the human condition. This is our desire to hide. This is our desire. We're so exposed. This is shame. This is shame just to, and I just made myself stay there, and I looked at this beautiful piece. And as I stayed, I really did feel that loving gaze of God, because I knew the end of the story. I know that that shame is not where God left us. He finds us there, but then he takes us all the way to a place where we can be seen with that incredible loving gaze through the cross, right? So I stayed, and I was so, like, my heart just was so healed by that moment. And let's guess what I'm talking about is what art can do in that
Uh-huh.
way of being
Yeah.
seen by the art.
Uh-huh. Gotcha. Um, okay. We're seeing, it invites us to see, and it's very different. Right? There was, my wife and I often joke about a commercial that used to come on when we first married in the 90s. Somebody would set up to sell art in a hotel room, and they'd say, sofa size art. Which is
Right.
kind of the opposite of what the kind of art you're talking about, right? It's art they were talking about, here's something you can fill your wall with, not something that you can really see, and certainly not something that you'd be seen by. And
Yeah, that's right. Whenever
that's
I'm in a
such a consumerist,
hotel,
yeah,
it
such a
is.
consumerist way to talk about, art, a sofa-sized piece of art.
Right. Right. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the practices. I have some practices that I recommend for young artists to keep making. And I think one of them is, I talk about some of the vices, and it's that idea of not confronting pain, numbing
Mm,
our pain.
yeah,
And it's related to the vice of gluttony, really, because I think when I see art like that, that's like, it's just made in a shallow way, sort of like kitsch, that
yeah,
or even just over sentimental art. It just feels like there was a shortcut there. There was some sort of shortcut of
mhm,
not confronting some of the suffering that we encounter as human beings, not sitting there for a while and being seen by the loving gaze of God, out of which would come that kind of rich art that I'm talking about. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be high art. It can be low. I'm talking about quilting, I'm talking about cooking. It doesn't have to be like all of this, high opera or whatever that people are so lauded for. It can be something that you make in the quiet of your home that can
yeah,
have that rich sense of not numbing your pain,
yeah,
not using gluttony, as I define it, would be just to sort of stuff yourself with something and then make something quick and shallow
mm,
and
yeah,
sentimental, right?
yeah. Yeah, so let's do that. Let's shift to the you identified five. Well, it's five of the seven deadly sins as hindrances to art making, and then you offer five practices that counteract those forces. So, I mean, since you mentioned gluttony, it had never really occurred to me to think of gluttony as a particular barrier to creative work. But as you said, gluttony is typically a function of numbing.
Mm,
One way to deal with emotion, whether that's sadness or any kind of feeling anything, is to channel it into creative work. And another way, a much easier way, is to watch another episode of whatever TV show you're binging, or to
right.
eat too much or drink too much, or
Mm.
and so I think we've touched on gluttony as a destructive interior force. Tell me about vainglory. So, I mean,
ugh, one of my least favorite ones, and my besetting vice,
Yeah.
Yeah. So vainglory is that I mean, you had it. Can you remind me of that definition that you put in the question that was so
Yeah.
good? You summed it up.
Yeah. I mean, it was good because it came straight from your book, by the way. Vainglory
I,
leads us to assess the quality of our work by the response it wins in the wider.
yes,
So,
that's right.
yeah, art as a way of well, gaining glory in a vain way.
Yes, that applause, right? That
Yeah.
great review. Oh, that New York Times bestseller list. Oh, that desire to be, get that. Yes, just to get that sort of market applause. Oh
Hmm.
my goodness, it's hard. I struggled with this my entire career, I think, because I've gone up the hill slowly and painstakingly in a circuitous route. Never had a New York Times best-selling book, never really won a major award. I've won some nice things here and there, but never really gotten that big career boost you get from
Hmm.
vainglorious applause.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wonder if Jesus protected me from that because he knows how hard my heart is
Yeah.
so addicted to that kind of thing. So he's
Yeah.
kept me on this downside, which I'm grateful for. But I always have to pay attention to it. That idea of I talk about honoring your work, and it's really one of our responsibilities as well. Is that idea of really championing our work by yeah, by offering it up, I guess, not to the one to that loving gaze, right? Not to
Hmm.
that vainglorious
Yeah.
applause. But it is hard. It would be
Oh,
nice. It would be nice, Jonathan, to every now and then to get, to have a book
sure.
not, whatever, just all those rejections and all there's bad
Oh,
reviews, books go out of print,
yeah.
especially in the field of literature. It's a brutal marketplace. I talk about that. It will it'll deal you blows that will make you wobble as you keep, trying to walk forward in this vocation.
Oh,
It
but
tells it tells you suck. Basically, it will tell you suck all the time.
yeah. Well, but when the Charlatans Boy came out, I was like, that's the best. That's as good as I can do right there. I can't write a better book than that. And um, and then it didn't do anything. I mean, it's amazing how few copies of that book sold. And I mean, it was so heartbreaking that I had to say, why is it so important to me that I be loved and admired by people I can't love back?
Oh,
Why is that so important? And I had to do some serious soul searches that I've got to, if I'm going to keep doing this, I can't be heartbroken. I've
that's
got people who love me. And why do I need people who don't know me to love me? And
yes.
and that
Well, right.
failure kind of rescued. I mean, that's why I'm still in the business. I mean, if I had kept limping, if it wasn't for that spectacular, what I thought of as a spectacular failure, and dealing with that heartbreak, yeah, I would still be. I don't know what I would be. I'd be a monster, I guess.
Well, it is a refining fire, right? And God cares much more about our hearts than he does about our success. And yes, he does care about our reaching, we're not just making it back. You and I could both be like Emily Dickinson and, press our flowers and create our poems and then die. And then everyone would discover how, oh my goodness, Jonathan and Mitali, weren't they
We were
amazing
so
writers?
wrong.
We shouldn't have ignored them. We should have lauded them when we had them, but it may happen, may not happen. But uh, in any case, it is, I mean, God knows our hearts, right? He knows what each of us can handle, what we can't handle. And what it did for me, as I think it did for you, is it refined our vocation, like why we're doing this. And so you're always holding intention, the receiver. Yes, you want your art to be received, but it's also in that joy of making that we recovered, both of us, I think, that idea that we make, you don't want it to be fully selfish. Of course, you want to have your art bring joy and beauty and goodness, etc. But essentially, it is our deep gladness. We write
Mhm.
because it helps us flourish. And, the glory of God is a human being who is fully alive, good old Saint
Mhm.
Irenaeus said, right? So are we bringing God glory? Yes. And he's like, yes.
Yeah.
So, but I give some examples of mortification that happens when you don't get. And but I do want your audience to know that that book is being reissued, Jonathan's book, so that it's going to find its way to its new audience, right? When is that book coming out again? The reissue?
Sometime in I think the fall of 26, probably. So the Charlotte's Boys coming out with the Rabbit Room
Yeah.
Press, new cover, new illustrations. Super excited. Yeah, I'm hoping, and I hope I will be in a better place in case it does do better than it did the first time. I hope I'm in a better place to be a person who can be all right either way, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's that hunger that all of us feel inside that none of us want to talk about, that desire to see our book being read. I mean, we worked hard on these things, and
Yeah.
there's such a hunger. And I really do believe God cares about that too, that deep desire for our work to reach people and for it to be lauded. And because we put our hearts into it, like you said, it might have been the best thing you ever wrote, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that desire is wrong. I think it's the ordering of the attachments, the ordering of it that's so important. And we get tested to see if it's that right order, right? Are
Yeah.
we? And so, yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. I'll be watching to see, how God is working for you. But yeah, it's going. It does. The idea. The other thing is we keep our eyes on the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. That idea that I know that you've probably heard from a reader or two that has said that some of my books that are out of print that got terrible reviews that didn't sell, I'll hear from one reader and they'll say, I reread that book 10 times. It was just it's so meaningful to me. And so that kingdom of God economy of, what is success and what is applause and what really matters. Maybe it's just that one child's heart that I reached. And it sounds noble, but it does help. It sounds like falsely noble, but
Sure.
it does, those little things do help you keep plodding on, that what I do matters. You don't want to do something that doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So of our 5 destructive interior forces, we're 40% of the way there. Vainglory, gluttony, envy. That's a booger.
Oh gosh, it's a bad one. It's when you start comparing, your sales rankings on Amazon secretly to other people.
You don't do that, Mitali. I know you don't do that.
Or you just check your ranking and you think, oh no, or you, it's definitely, it is a besetting.
Okay, who's your one person you compare yourself against in the rankings, Mitali? Come on.
Are we in the confessional now?
Here.
Are we in the confessional? Is this the confessional?
I don't want to know.
I don't want to know. No, it's really a good sign, though. It's a calibration. It's that whole beautiful practice we have of really, it is confessing. It is calibrating. When we see that we're feeling envy by some of these outward signs that we're doing, our thought life, our behaviors, and we see it, and we think, oh my goodness, I don't want to be guided by envy. Will suck the creativity right out of you.
Absolutely.
It'll just absolutely, that old movie with Mozart and Salieri, that idea of Amadeus, how his envy just completely consumed him, and that's what envy does. It'll grow, it'll take root. But we do have a beautiful tool. We can confess, and we can receive the absolution of grace, and we can start the next day by saying, yes, I do feel this, and I don't want to be consumed by it. I repent. I turn away, and fill me now with delight in somebody else's work. Let me be a receiver of this work. There are practices we can do to countervail envy because.
Wait, we're going to get to the better practices.
All right.
Don't jump ahead, Mitali.
No, not jumping ahead. But I do want to encourage people who struggle with envy. Bring it in the light. There's we're not people of shame. We can say we're frail children of dust and feeble as frail, but we know who we trust, and we can bring our sin to that person, our vice, and then we keep making if we do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I loved your phrase that envy is a zero-sum game of lovelessness.
Yes.
And you also said, I know we got to keep moving, but I just want to hear you briefly say another sentence or two about the idea that envy keeps us from attaching properly to our work. Could you say another sentence or two about what that means? How envy keeps us from attaching properly to our work?
Well, envy becomes a comparison, right? And so I think what it does is the next thing would be to denigrate our work, to the process and that we came through to create something, the product, we would maybe feel shame about it, or we would feel we wouldn't honor it, and it
Yeah.
deserves to be honored in a
Yeah.
right attachment. And maybe it's not. Maybe my work is always going to be. I'm never going to be some amazing. If I'm a painter, I'm not going to be Rembrandt. But I painted something. Dead gummit. There's your. I'll use your. I'll use your ancestral language, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Dead gummit. I made this thing.
Yeah.
I did it, and that deserves a celebration. So
Yeah.
I think it does cause us to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And so disordered attachment would be to envy your neighbor, which actually ends up causing us to hate ourselves,
Yeah.
and it goes downward in a downward spiral fast.
Yeah. Well, there's also something about envy when when I find some way to envy a fellow maker, my work and that person's work, they become somehow fungible the way money is. Like the whole idea of money is $1 is as good as another dollar, therefore whoever has the most dollars wins. And if the things we've made just become a means of comparison, then they become interchangeable. And I think that's a corollary of your idea that we don't attach properly to our work. We're not valuing the work for itself, but rather just as another way of keeping score. When in fact,
Right.
my work is my work and your work is your work. And you said you've won some little awards. I haven't even won any little awards. So I could compare and say, that could turn into some sort of something, or I can say, I really love the work I've done and I really love the work Mitali's done. I'm so glad that we're both doing it.
Yes, huzzah to both of us, because it really what you're describing is that commodification that
Yeah.
results in
Focusized art.
Yeah, it's a scarcity culture, right? It's that
Yeah.
idea that there's just not enough audience to go around.
Yeah.
Isn't enough. I am in competition with every other maker because there's a scarcity of reception. And
Mm-hmm.
that is so not true. It is absolutely false. There is an abundance of reception, whether it be one child or many children or one reader who connects with you. There's an
Yeah.
abundance of reception. And so we can't operate out of that
Yeah.
scarcity
Yeah. Yeah.
culture. Yeah.
All right. I'm doing a terrible job of rushing you through this, which was what I was planning to do. Anger is another one of the destructive interior forces. Now, when you're talking about justice, anger and justice are pretty closely related,
That's right.
right? I mean,
That's right. This is where justice, becomes well, this is where the art that is made out of protest or to challenge powerful structures or to truth telling that is confronting evil, even at the danger of the maker being imprisoned or disappearing as they are at this very moment in different
Mhm.
parts of the world when they speak out against oppressive regimes. This is that power of art, that prophetic power that
Mhm.
is the rightfully channeled way to use anger. Anger itself, of course, is not a sin. It is the kind of anger that causes us to become less than, to diminish into a different version of ourselves. It's kind of anger
Mm.
that art can really take hold
Yeah.
of and confront structures that need to be confronted. And so, rightfully channeled, rightfully ordered again, anger can be a beautiful emotion that can really allow us to create. It can also, as I see today, when there are artists of our age in our culture who are so angry all the time, they stop making things that are worth that actually have the power to confront evil because they're just reacting all the time. They're responding all the time to
Mhm.
their out of their anger to what is happening, and that is the temptation, right? Is just to go, oh, just
Yeah.
issue punches on social media or
Yeah.
just to instead of taking that anger, sitting it with it, and allowing it to be channeled into our art for the greater good, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
hope.
All right. Well, we're going to return to that in a minute when we talk about retreating to let your anger breathe. All right. And then this one's too painful to talk about. Sloth. Um,
Sloth is terrible, Jonathan. It will. I don't know. Are you one of those disciplined writers that gets up at 6 a.m. with your coffee and then
Oh,
bounds into your?
no.
I I have always talk about envy. I've always envied the
Yeah.
people who do that. And for
Yeah.
me, as my editor and agents know, it's only that deadline that kicks my booty to
Yeah.
finish anything.
Yeah.
I am really not that disciplined, and I am extremely slow. I would much rather do anything than work.
Yeah. I
And
love
I'm in
not
that.
writing. Yeah. That's
I
my
just,
hobby.
I'm excellent at it.
Yeah.
I'm so good at it. I get a lot of other stuff done, like in the garden or
Yeah.
whatever,
Right. Yeah.
but I'm not writing. And if that is truly my vocation, then it does kind of verge on disobedience to some extent,
Sure.
right?
Oh,
And so
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I've read at least one whole book about acedia, that other, the version of certainly closely related to sloth, but ultimately acedia and sloth is a function not just of being lazy, but a function of sort of not stepping into your own, for lack of a better word, your own greatness. Your the magnanimity that you're invited into, the largeness of spirit. We don't have to talk about greatness because that sounds like.
No, I know what you mean.
But we are called to be large of spirit, and
Mm.
and when I choose to shrink instead, that's not humility, and that's not, and it's not humility, and it's worse than laziness. I'm also
Well,
lazy.
yeah, what you're describing is that word I can't pronounce, pusillanimity.
Pusillanimity, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, English, not being my first language, I struggle with some of these words. I go into the women's section and say, "Do you have a lingerie department?" That's not good. But so that word, that's
Yeah,
shrinking back, and
yeah,
sloth just taps into it. It takes courage, right, to overcome it, because it's much easier for people who like not to make waves, or to, like me. I was talking about that deep work I did personally and I'm doing personally. It's so arduous. It's
mhm,
anytime you want to transform or do anything worthwhile, it takes work. And
yeah,
I would much rather not work. I don't like it. It hurts.
yeah.
Yeah. But it is definitely the part of the cross that we bring into our vocation. We just sometimes, and I do give some tricks when we get to practices to trick yourself. I trick myself all the time to get myself going, because I know who I am. As I said, let's return to frail children of dust and feeble
Yeah.
as frail. I know what I'm working with here. It's not the most hardworking person on earth. Gotta trick
Uh,
him. Gotta trick my
yeah. All
mind.
right. Maybe you just don't have. You don't feel like you've got so much to prove, and therefore it's hard for you to
Oh,
get
no,
going.
I have everything to prove because I am designed in the image of God. I mean, it's like a lot to prove. Like you said, the magnanimity, that if, what C.S. Lewis says, if we really saw ourselves as in some ways, that the immortal beings that we are, the greatness of us, we'd
Yeah.
be like awed of ourselves, right? So
Yeah.
there is
All
that.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's. We're already over time, but we're having a great time. So let's just keep trucking here because we got to talk about the practices that counteract those five destructive interior forces.
Yes.
So when it comes to vainglory, you
Yeah.
talk about accepting moments of mortification.
Oh, yes. That is a brilliant practice. It's an ancient, John Climactus, I think, is the one who, or is it Cassian? I can't remember. One of the old church fathers back from the early first
I
300
think
parts of
Climacus was who you were talking about.
Climactus. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he gives a whole system of how to do this when we're dealing with trying to root out vainglory. And there's 4 steps. I'm trying to remember. I wrote this book a while ago, but I'd still do it. And one of them is to remain, to stay
Yeah.
when you feel mortification. So
Not
I
to
can
run
give it
away.
not to run. And as again, it's the kind of person that I am. I like to flee. I like to hide. I like not to
Yeah.
work. Right. So that's the way I'm wired. Some people like wade into it. I'm not
Yeah,
like
right.
that. So for me, it's the remaining that's been the key. And so embracing moments of mortification is the practice. And it comes up like, so vainglory, I'll just give that example from my book, which uh
Pretty cringy stuff, but go ahead. If
so
you're okay with it,
cringy.
go ahead.
I'm sorry to share it, but it is cringy because it shows what kind of person I am. I'm too old to pretend anymore, Jonathan. I'm too old to pretend. Yeah, so I had, some books come out early on and they didn't have much success. And then I had a book come out called You Bring the Distant Near, which was it featured Indian American girls, like many of my books did. And this one, though, oh my goodness, it's getting great starred reviews, and
Nominated for the book.
Mortification. Oh,
no, I'm sorry. The book was nominated for some big award.
Yeah, National Book Award,
Yeah,
right?
National Book Award. Yeah.
Yes, there's all the finalists for that, semi-finalists for the National Book Award. And it's like my publisher was all hype. They were like, "This is it, Mitali. You're finally going to get your breakthrough." Now they sent me on tour, Jonathan. I mean, they actually put some bucks behind the book, right? So one of the places they sent me was Texas, and they told me, there's actually quite a lot of Indian American readers there, young women who are coming of age. This is going to be your place. So I get to this. It's midsummer, Texas, in midsummer, and the venue is this tent, and it's hotter than Hades in there.
Texas.
I mean,
it's hotter than Texas.
It's hotter than Texas. My love to you, Texan folks. I don't know how you do that heat, but in any case, there I was. It was a tent, and my publicist is there, and she's this young woman, all giddy because she's so excited. She's on tour, and I get there, and I see these crowds, Jonathan, of Indian American teenagers outside the tent. And I'm thinking,
your
my
crowd.
time has come.
Yeah.
This is my moment. This is exciting. And, it's not like my seventh book. It's not like a new thing. I've been writing. I just haven't had any success yet.
Yeah.
So I get in, and I notice the other writers. There's a younger Indian woman next to me, and she's looking at me, and she's young. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, I could probably offer her some guidance in this career. Yeah, look at me. She's probably looking at me thinking, and I can offer that. I can step up. Maybe that's what God has me here for, and then, so I'm getting my pen ready, and my publicist is there, and we're all, the tent
limbering
doors.
up your signing hand.
Yeah, limbering up my signing hand. Tent doors open. Streams of Indian American girls come in, and they all line up in front of this younger author. Where for debut novel, not a single one of them in my line, Jonathan, not a soul. And this has happened to me in the past, right? Before, and I've endured it. So I'm remembering that in the past, God in His grace, when this first happens to you, my fellow young creatives, not fellow, but my younger creatives, when it first happens to you, if you stay, God will show up in spades and give you a moment of just abundance. And that happened to me early in my career. This time, it was just mortification. And it was just like, I'm like, again? What? I thought I was beyond this. And so my publicist is sweating. I'm sweating. And, but I remembered climactus. I remembered that I'm supposed to embrace moments, and my cheeks are hot. I'm thinking, this is just more mortification. That's all this career is going to give me, is mortification. And then, so the program was this laminated big card for this teen book festival. It was in front of me. I look over at this young Indian woman. She's got a long black braid, and she's just sweating. She's signing. She's trying to connect. She's trying to make conversation. And I look at the laminated placard, and I can almost hear the invitation of God to remain in the moment, but not just to remain, but to embrace it. And I thought, dang, Jesus, this is hard. But I knew that this was the moment. So I got up, pick up the laminated card, and I spent that rest of that signing standing behind this beautiful younger writer and fanning her with the placard. And it was amazing, Jonathan, because as I began the motion, as I picked up the card, as I stood up, as my body took my place where God wanted it to be, it was like all of that horrible feeling of envy and mortification and it completely disappeared. And all I could feel was such joy. Truly, I tell you, I mean, this is a miracle, because inside I was just like so consumed. I felt such joy that all these Indian American girls were connecting with this young Indian American writer, and that they were getting to read this book. And I just thought, abundance, like a book for readers. And this is what I'm doing in this world. I get to be here. My little publicist behind me was like practically crying. But since then, it's interesting, because that younger Indian American writer has reached out to me. She turned around in that moment. She smiled so sweetly. I still see her face, and I smiled back, and we have become friends. And we've just supported each other. And then the little publicist behind me, she left the job, but she and I've stayed connected, and we've become friends. And so there's a longer story for all of that. I think that's really unfolding.
I love that story.
Cringe.
It's like watching The Office.
In that moment, like my eyes would go to the camera and I would give a knowing look.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, let's, since you mentioned it, envy, I'm going to skip over our counteraction for gluttony for the moment and
Mm-hmm.
talk about your practice for overcoming envy.
Mm.
And you say pursuing community
Mm.
is how you do that.
Yes. Right.
And being, showing gratitude for creativity by all artists, including ourselves. I think that's really helpful. I like to say that everybody who's trying to make something beautiful is your ally. And that's not always hard to, that's not always, that's not always an easy principle to live by, but I believe it. I believe it in my head, and sometimes it makes it down to my heart. But
Yes.
another thing you talk about is making friends. It's fine to make friends with editors. That's what people want to do when they go to the conferences. But what really sustains a writer's or somebody who does creative work is making friends with other people who do creative work. And I love that
Right.
insight. The difference between networking and just having friends is so important.
Yes, and that's what your habit group does so beautifully. And as I was just telling you before the recording, how much I kind of wish I had more time to join you all on that quest, but that's what you're creating in that community.
Yeah.
And really, we don't go very far on our own, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that idea of linking arms around that shared mission. And it again brings us back to that abundance culture and away from scarcity culture. And
Yeah.
there's no better way to stay in step than to have people around you who are marching to that same tune, right?
Yeah.
So,
Who know what you're going through.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I have groups like that, and we share deeply, openly. We talk about these are people. Most of them aren't followers of Jesus, but we so connect so deeply around. And I share with them the way that I just shared with you guys about my mortification, and
Mhm.
we connect in a deep way around some of these shared themes with our creativity. That's
Yeah.
really a great way to have friends across all different kinds of borders.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. So I really appreciate that idea that it's community that rescues us from envy. It doesn't always, right? Sometimes, what was it? Oscar Wilde says. Since we're quoting Oscar Wilde today, he also said, anybody can commiserate with a friend in their misery, but it takes or can commiserate with a friend in their failure, but it takes a saint to commiserate with a friend in their success.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's a
but I
beautiful
don't. But
funny
the
quote.
truth is, I'm not sure that's true. It's a funny thing to
Mm,
say. He always had funny things to say,
yeah.
but when I think about it, I'm not sure it's true. The more as you learn to rejoice with the joyful, you get better at it, I think.
It is a practice, right? And I think it does take some kind of action. We can feel that little envy, kind of that little glimmer of envy inside of us when somebody's book, gets out, and you've been walking that same journey and you feel it. And the way to do it is definitely the practice is immediately confess, bring it to light, and then
Mhm.
to do something tangible like send a note or
Yeah,
rejoice, get on your knees and give thanks. There's always something that we could do that's more that will push that back. Because as I
yeah,
said, if that thing festers and grows, it will stultify, it will kill our own creativity, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it'll end up we will end up like Salieri in that movie, just bitter
yeah,
and
yeah. Well, great insight that you need to do something that's not just internal, but actually something that involves moving your body, whether that's fanning the girl, the the
Mhm.
the wildly successful debut novelist, or
Yeah,
even
it
getting on your
really
knees.
is.
Yeah,
I think true. It's something about the bodily. It's like a penance, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
like you get our absolution, but then we get something to do with our bodies. Like that's the way we're designed. We're embodied
yeah,
people. And so it does take maybe picking up a pen and running a card or doing
yeah,
something that is that is have to do with your hands and your heart and your feet and
yeah,
your
yeah.
but
Well, with regard to gluttony, we don't need to spend much time on this because, like I said, we're way over.
sorry.
We're going to get fired. Um,
Yeah.
you talk about fasting
Yeah.
to embrace vulnerability. The
Mm,
thing that I use to numb whatever, if I fast from that and I find myself vulnerable to the thing I'm trying to avoid, that's productive. You say,
it's hard. It's very hard, but it's one of the probably the best practices that I'm as an artist, I would say, has helped me continue to make.
Mhm.
Mine, of course, you have to look at whatever you're using to numb. It'll differ for each of us, creatives, whatever we're
Mhm.
using to avoid being vulnerable to facing our pain. And I'm not saying there's, all of us struggle. We're always on the verge of needing some kind of medication, right? I'm not talking about prescribed medication here or anything. But there is that um, age old understanding that artists are susceptible to deep emotions. And so without that, many artists have ended up in the abyss of despair, right?
Mhm.
That's just it's one of the hazards of feeling in a stewardship way so that we can offer that feeling back into our art, right? Those deep
Yeah.
emotions, whether it be joy or despair or sadness or whatever it is that in that whole human plethora of emotions, if we are not feeling it, it won't be um, saturating our art. And yet, if we feel it too much, will it destroy us, right?
Yeah, right.
So there's that balance in there. I understand that, but I do think that our generation is definitely erring on the side. Speaking for myself, I err on the side of numbing rather
Mm.
than allowing myself to feel too much. And my numbing agents are often food,
Mhm.
specifically anything to do with potatoes, or technology. As opposed, like I've become a consumer of other people's creativity endlessly. Like whether it be some of these memes are really good, Jonathan. If you ever scroll,
Memes are
these
funny.
they're just creative. These TikToks and things. I mean, they're
Yeah.
just some of them are genius. And
Have you seen some of the
yeah,
dog pictures on the internet? They're incredible.
amazing. Those are
Yeah.
all my whole feed is like soldier reunions and dog videos and things like that. I mean, the algorithm knows me better than my husband, sadly. No, no, I'm just kidding. No,
Yeah.
that's not true. But it's that idea of tempering that. Like there's nothing wrong with consuming other people's creativity or eating a lot of potato chips. But if I can't say no to that, that's what fasting does as a practice, right? It recalibrates our attachments. It will say, can I say no to myself and feel what I'm feeling for that
Mhm.
24-hour period? Can
Mhm.
I say no? And that's what such a great simple practice going back. So one day a week, just to pull away from whatever it is, and periodic fasts too, where if you're feeling overwhelmed with anger or with despair, or you're not making it all, to fast from to go away and just to be with God and retreat
Mm.
and sit with your let whatever's coming up come up
Yeah.
and feel it. Ugh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, my friends. I know it's hard. I hate it too, but we must do it to be faithful, right, to the craft. We have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Mitali, I'm going to have to send listeners to your book for your last two practices for overcoming
Yes.
anger and sloth. We don't want to give it all away here. It'd be a spoiler. So,
Right.
since I said we're going to try to keep it at under 40 minutes and we're now at an hour, we're going to wrap up here. But I do want to
You
ask
and I.
my traditional last question. Who are the writers that make you want to write, Mitali?
Yeah, I thought about that. And I would say, Steeped in Stories has 7 of my favorite
Yeah.
writers on my book, Steeped in Stories, but I'll narrow it down to 2.
Okay.
Ellen Montgomery,
Okay.
the Anne of Green Gables books, because she deals with deep theological questions like the Odyssey, etc., for books for children,
Yeah.
and lots of psychological themes. I love her writing, and especially her nature writing. And then Maud Hart Lovelace, another writer of books for children, who weaves her faith into her stories in such a beautiful way, and her humor. And she's not high literature, but
Uh-huh.
she's just really fun to read. So
Yeah.
those are 2 of my role models.
Yeah. Well, Mitali Perkins, it's always such a pleasure. Thank you for spending a whole hour with me.
Sorry, Jonathan. As my boys always say, people ask you to speak to them. We would. I do love words. We both do. But we
Yeah,
always have a good time, you and I.
that's
We
right.
always
Well,
do.
thank
Yeah.
you. All right.
Thank
See you
you.
soon, I hope.
All right. Yes, definitely.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.